I'm Mark R. Hassan, and welcome to BHA Plus's first podcast of 2026, recorded at the tip of a chilly winter in glorious North York, Toronto, and a mere 79 days from the first day of spring. If you visited bigheadamusements.com, you may have noticed several featured custom audio and video services. It's a slightly more robust variety of what I initially offered when I started video work in the early 1990s. At that time, VHS dubbing and converting between NTSC, PAL, and CCAM were the norm. 30 years later, clients shifted from analog tape-to-tape transfers to tape-to-digital transfers, usually MP4 files. But in the last 5 years, there's been a specific embrace of analog formats. You can argue there's a correlation between vinyl, cassette tapes, and CDs, and legacy home video formats. There's owning something that won't vanish from a streaming service, the physicality of handling and playing audio and video media, especially on vintage gear, and the lack of digital distractions when it's just you, your media, and a cell phone turned off. Whether it's using Video 8, Hi 8, Mini DV, or VHS to film specific sections or film a whole production, some filmmakers and videographers are using these legacy formats to capture and include analog footage in their digital workflows. The same also holds true with digital footage shot with old phones and point-and-shoot cameras, the latter being especially attractive to filmmakers because all these so-called dumb cameras do is capture stills and video footage in conventional SD and HD formats like AVI, MOV, and MP4. Most record on SD media, and the footage is transferable via USB to almost any device. The benefits of a final product in digital format is its portability and shareability, but not unlike making a curated music mix on cassette or CD, releasing a movie on tape or DVD offers something else. Again, you own it, you store it and or display it, and can enjoy it anytime and anywhere you want. With VHS, you definitely need a device specifically designed for playback, such as a VCR, and a monitor. And although a conventional flat-screen monitor is fine, legacy formats holding standard definition video really look best on a CRT monitor. Similar to my podcast interview with filmmaker, editor, composer Schnoodlebug, the following discussion with musician and music video director Max Farrell covers the making of his short film. It's ostensibly a visual accompaniment to the album Blessings Infinity, Season 1, as performed by himself and the bandmates of Blessings Infinity, Ap Bergeron and Liam Blackwell. And we also discuss in detail the band's decision to release the short on VHS. Full disclosure, number 1. I was engaged by Farrell for a small VHS dub run of his film. Full disclosure, number 2. It had been a while since I ran a series of VHS-only dubs, so this particular job was really fun. Full disclosure, number 3. I'll have a shameless featurette next week on how Farrell's 37-minute widescreen film was workflowed from an iMac that played his personally 4x3 recomposed MP4 file to VHS, using a pair of roughly 20-year-old VCRs. So here's a quick setup of our half-hour chat. Farrell spent almost 8 years gathering footage as he traveled by car, train, and air, and with a specific interest in experimental imagery, he crafted the film's sections into a work that not only matches the heavily improvised nature of the instrumental tracks, but forms a perfect audio-video experience that's soothing for those whose ears and eyes enjoy an immersive journey. Both in the BHA Plus blog and in the podcast details, I've posted links to both the widescreen version of Blessings Infinity, Season 1, as well as music videos selected by Farrell that show his interest in fusing analog and digital visuals, as well as using vintage gear, embracing the nuances of glitchy video, and his evolution as a filmmaker. The visual version of this podcast on YouTube will also feature brief samples of both music and visuals from Season 1. It's up to you if you want to pause this podcast and sample some or all of his work beforehand, or save them for after our discussion. But I do recommend watching the short film on a large screen and in a darkened room. Make sure to disconnect yourself from social media, because like a classic concept album, you should relax, listen, and drift away with as few interruptions and distractions as possible.
So I started as a musician first, and then I guess really just like with this project, Blessings Infinity, I started getting into making video for music. And so it started with making some videos we would play in the background for our live shows. And at the same time, I was experimenting with sort of analog video through feedback loops and collaging sort of manipulated found VHS. I showed a few friends what I was doing, and I was in the Montreal music community at the time. And there's a lot of interest for me to sort of just make kind of abstract or experimental videos, often manipulating footage that people brought to me, and then I'd sit with them in my room and sort of do processing in real time and hit record when they liked it. And then that sort of, yeah, that led to doing music videos separately from my music practice.
Which aspects of your early music videos kind of led you towards the concept of blessings?
I guess it's quite interesting to me because I guess I started filming these long sort of shifting landscapes slightly before we started the band, but I knew that I wanted to do something that was audiovisual that sort of let me explore that other side, that video side of my practice. It's interesting because the blessing stuff has always been very natural. So pretty much I started with almost unedited, unmanipulated landscape footage, trying to make these long, sprawling scenes that were often much longer than our tracks would be, but because it's a largely improvised band, we didn't really know how long each song would be. So if we estimated it would be 6, 7 minutes, I'd make 10 minutes of video, sort of just blending sort of randomly this kind of stuff. And then the analog manipulation was kind of done in parallel. So my early music videos are really just kind of, I was processing a lot of people's footage through analog gear and manipulating it. And then as time went on, I got more interested in sort of, I moved away from the purity of the analog video into sort of editing and layering, analog processing. I rarely sort of shoot my own videos without doing some kind of manipulation. So I think a few years ago, I made it for a band called Cola. I did a video that was almost entirely footage I shot with a little bit of analog stuff. It was called Water Table. And then subsequently I did another video that had no analog stuff for them, and another video for them that was just sort of collaged archival footage from archive.org. So as my practice sort of evolved, I blended lots of different facets. But for this Blessings season 1, I sort of went back to the original concept, and so it's just all shot on kind of like prosumer cameras with just like digital compositing.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been fascinated by sort of moving patterns, and I think for myself it tends to come from family trips to Windsor and Ottawa, where we're always driving on highways. So for me, one of the most relaxing things to see is just passing scenery, whether it's roads or trees. So that's one of the reasons why I really enjoyed the collage of videos that you made, because there's a lot of that. But what I find fascinating is that, I think you said that it was filmed over several years, so there's a lot of globe-trotting, I guess, that was involved in acquiring footage from planes, footage from trains, footage from the car. I love the way that it's all just kind of amalgamated together.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I have the same feeling. You know, I used to love looking at the car as I was a kid, and one thing I really remember from that time was how the telephone poles kind of, the wires kind of dip up and down and dip up and down, and it becomes this kind of line drawing as you look at it and let your eyes relax. And then when I started doing this, I guess I started shooting this kind of stuff in 2015. I was doing a lot of traveling between actually Montreal, where I was living, and Toronto, where my family's from, and other parts of Ontario. I also have some family in New York City. So my favorite way to do that is to take the train from Montreal, which is like, some people think it's a hellishly long trip. It's like 12 hours or something, but it's some of the most stunning landscape. You're on this single track rail with no roads nearby, going on Lake Champlain and Hudson. And yeah, it's really beautiful. And then you see these kinds of interjections of human development and land use along the way. And it's beautiful in its own way, but it's a very stark reminder of kind of how we're altering the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely get that from the video, and that is something that also comes through when you're doing a lot of traveling, because you'll sort of go through these sections where there's just farms. The landscape changes. It might go from flat to maybe hilly, then it might be more circuitous. And then you go into the city areas, and then you have this built-up architecture, which can also be very different. I love the fact that there's a lot of diversity, because I think you do hop around from sort of region to region, country to country. So I think some of it's also tropical. I can't remember if some of the footage was also shot in Cuba.
Yeah, some of the actually the stuff from Cuba is actually in the first section, night soil. So it's kind of the nighttime driving, the cab driver, and some of the street scenes there, and that's blended with subway footage from New York City. But some of the tropical stuff I shot a lot in South Africa. I was there doing research for my PhD, which is in biology. Some of the other kind of warm weather stuff, there's a couple small clips from Tenerife, but yeah, I think the sort of the mass amount volume of footage is probably from North America. But then, I recently relocated to Scotland, so it's not tropical, but some epic mountain scenes here.
Have you ever used any sort of older analog cameras, like either VHS, SVHS, any of the 8mm formats, or even mini DV?
Not for this project, but I started one of my first video cameras. Well, I guess I had like a Canon PowerShot when I was a little kid, and that was the first thing I saved up for, and I would shoot these like 30-second videos. But then when I was in high school in Toronto, there was a film and video course, and I shot on mini DV pretty much exclusively. And then in recent years, I've collected a few different cameras, different tape-based cameras. I find it kind of hard to find ones that actually work.
Mm-hmm.
The tape mechanism's intact, the battery works. The ones I have currently, they don't seem to record directly to tape, but I can use them for sort of camera-based feedback. But yeah, no, I haven't shot a lot of my own material on those kinds of cameras recently. I think just because I guess I've been preferring small cameras that are easy to take around. So when you go on these trips, you're on a train and you see a beautiful landscape and just like take it out quickly. And so the vast majority of footage for season 1 was shot on a Canon Ixus, like a point and shoot camera that has 1080p. And then for the work with Cola, I used some of the small fees they paid me to buy a GoPro. There's a bit of GoPro footage in there, and then other ones are just from my phone, which is just like an Android phone.
From my experience, I find that as much as I would love to shoot with large analog cameras, especially broadcast cameras, there's just the impracticality which makes it really challenging. And then you just know that you can shoot like with a point and shoot camera, and I think it's also less conspicuous. So on the one hand, it is kind of fun to have something that's sort of unusual. Let's say it's a high-8 camcorder, and people will kind of notice it. But on the other hand, then like you mentioned, how do you power it? And do you want to capture it digitally? I find mini DV to be the most problematic because the tape is so small and fragile, and the mechanisms are prone to ridiculous amounts of failure. Because I have several mini DV devices, and I think at this point, out of maybe 8, 2 now work. When you're filming, do you find that because everybody has got phones, that it's just so easy to film anything without any kind of concern, people worrying about being filmed, or maybe filming something that maybe you shouldn't be filming, but it's visually interesting?
Yeah, people just don't seem to really care so much anymore. I mean, I'm very cautious about filming people. I try to not have people in my shots. In the whole season 1 video, I think you see people their faces maybe a split second, like as two subway trains are passing, there's like one fleeting instant where a guy on the other train, as we're passing and going through different tunnels, he like literally looks directly at me and like sees that I'm filming. But other than that, there's didn't shoot anyone directly. But often, I find that for some of these videos, I'm shooting like between 2 and 10 minutes at a time, just like trying to hold it as steady as possible. And it seems like people are curious, and it makes them look up and look out the window and see, what am I actually looking at? What's interesting to me? But yeah, people don't seem to really care.
Mm-hmm. Is there a particular piece of analog gear that you like to work with, or one that you sort of have your eye on, whether it's a mixer, a camera, a camcorder, something to either maybe do layering or even just using CRT monitors?
Yeah, it's funny, moving from North America, where I had a pretty good collection I had amassed over a number of years, often buying stuff just on Craigslist or a couple pieces from people selling on the Video Circuits Facebook group. I had some pieces I was really sort of fond of. One, it's kind of clunky, but it's the Videonics MX1 video mixer. I think having a video mixer, especially one with a Luma key or a chroma key, is sort of essential in my mind for making sort of really interesting patterns. And then the other workhorse I really like is having a CRT with a built-in VCR, just because it makes you have one less unit that's separate. And I just have a tape in going at all times, and if I like whatever I'm doing, I can just immediately record, and there's no fussing about channel selection and stuff like that. But I think the other thing, sort of unsung hero I've found, is sort of an amplifier. So either a distribution amplifier to allow you to sort of split signals without losing gain, but also when you're sort of doing feedback loops and stuff, being able to really control that gain and sort of maybe do a bit of coloring is where a lot of the tactility of analog feedback generation comes in for me. So I do some camera feedback stuff, but with the Videonics and sort of one or two amplifiers in the chain, I found I could do some really interesting internal feedback loops and also sort of feedback with sort of other video sources.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some favorite cameras. I like using tube cameras, but it's similar kind of thing where they're just standalone cameras, because it's part of that era when you had the camera and the recorder and they were separate and they were tethered by a power cable. So I would love to take them out, let's say, to a park and shoot foliage and light. But then the whole question is, how do you power it? What am I going to record it on? Lugging it all the way there. So it's still something that I would like to do in the new year, but it's sort of strategizing that, because powering, I think, is a big issue, especially because they do use a lot of voltage.
Yeah, I guess if you could get the power issue sorted. I was at the sort of video meetup many years ago, and someone who had more of like a Eurorack style video synth module had this really interesting kind of small preview monitor that took in composite video, and it allowed you to record, and it was battery powered. And so I feel like if you could get the power issue sorted, you could probably do some sort of real-time capture with some of that stuff that would be like potentially pretty usable. But yeah, the power is the issue. I find plugging in all these different machines of different eras, and I often find that sometimes there's a ghost in the machine somehow. I feel like I'm building these almost sculptural elements where I'm taking 5 or 6 different units and plugging them in all different ways, and if one of them's not grounded properly or something, or you turn them on in a weird order or something, it's like I just can't get a certain type of feedback that I want, or something doesn't really work. But then other times the magic is there, and it's this kind of elusive, almost temperamental nature of the analog equipment that it's frustrating, but it's really appealing.
I think maybe one of the more rewarding aspects is when you find, I guess, what they call like that sweet spot. You stumble upon something and you get something that's really, really interesting, and then you try and remember what you did, or hope that it lasts long enough that you can grab it and then use it for something else.
yeah, had an effect like that. One of the first things I ended up doing, I have a general idea of what I did, but it was this really beautiful kind of feedback pattern. And it was so nice and sort of continuously evolving, but very stable. I recorded like 20 minutes of it because I knew I would never be able to get it back.
Just out of curiosity, do you have sort of your own stock library of sort of background plates that you use, whether it's just scenery, whether it's objects, whether it's machines, just so that you have other material to draw from, or do you always start fresh or rely on what your clients bring you and then you sort of build on that?
Now that I've been doing it for quite a while, obviously I have this massive archive of landscape, but that has always been reserved for blessings. So I never really wanted to use it for other projects until this came out, and I felt like this was sort of the big thing I was working towards. But in terms of the analog processing, I sort of every once in a while I'll just go and sort of experiment, and I have a bit of this archive now of different kind of camera or internal feedback that I will use for videos, sometimes using them as a little flare or layering them into stuff that I make purpose built for the project. But often I like to approach each project as new and really work with the artist to see what aesthetic they like, what kind of concepts or prompts from the creation of the work I could use. Sometimes people come to me with footage and say, "Oh, I have this, can you process this?" But I think as time goes on, now people are more approaching me to say, "Oh, I'd like a video." And so I have to sort of tease out some of these prompts from them. So yeah, no, I don't have a real starting template. I really like to be inspired by the music itself and sort of some prompts that people give me. My newest project, it's only about a 1 minute sort of teaser clip, but there's a saxophone player in Toronto called Karen Ing, and she's absolutely incredible. And she has an album coming out, and she's commissioned, I think, 4 or 5 1 minute clips for different tracks on her upcoming album. The first one just came out, I think, a week ago by Colby Richardson, who also does a lot of fantastic video work. So I think she's going to post mine tomorrow, but the track is called Tactile Black. And so obviously I started with black, but she wanted it 9:16, so able to be viewed on a phone for kind of like Instagram or TikTok or something. And so I kind of played around with this idea of the white rectangle kind of glitching and moving around as if it's sort of like a sub screen within your screen, maybe escaping or building some kind of tactility. I like being prompted. I find being told to make a video with no prompt other than maybe the song and the lyrics, I find sometimes it's harder than having a prompt and having some kind of constraint.
I guess because there are so many different ways that people are absorbing and essentially watching videos at this point, whatever concept you have to kind of make sure that it's kind of malleable to what the client wants. So whether it's on a phone, whether it's going to be landscape, whether it's going to be portrait, whether it's going to go on YouTube, there's certain things you have to be aware of in terms of resolution, the final format, or the different specific formats that they would like it to be displayed on.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's becoming less popular, but I sort of usually work just in like the landscape traditional monitor shaped 16:9, and then maybe if people want to cut a version for teasers, or I've had worked with clients or artists who are working with a record label, and they tend to want the final video, but also little clips that are, fragments or in 9:16 or something like this. And in those cases, I'm happy to work with whatever they want, but I feel like I tend to think more in 16 by 9, long form. I like kind of slower editing where you hold images for longer and sort of let them naturally morph to fit the music. Like a lot of what I do in editing is probably more akin to maybe curation and nudging the images. So I'll take a longer clip where there's a natural transition in it and place that where there's a transition in the music, and then I might speed up or slow down the clip to sort of match a cut later on, rather than sort of doing this like frequent editing, frequent cuts. But yeah, I think it's file format, arrangement. It seems to be more driven by whether the piece is meant to be an advertisement for something or whether it should be standalone in support of the vision of the larger, of the track. And so I tend to work on more full-length music videos, but maybe that'll change in the future.
And then one of my last questions, just in regards to your decision to have Blessings released on VHS. Where did that idea come from? And sort of talk about how it also went over when you had them at the concert.
So I guess at this time, sort of as we were sort of playing with Blessings early on, I was also at the same time doing this video processing in my room. And because it started as an audiovisual project, it seems kind of like being able to doing a full album like video is kind of like a huge task for me. This is the longest thing I've ever edited, and it's really just a series of shorter videos. But when you put it all together, it's one of the most kind of labor-intensive video projects I've done. I've made some 60-minute videos for people, but that's like just putting as much footage as I can find. So for Blessings, I think knowing it was an audiovisual project, I knew I wanted to release it somehow, whether that be just a digital file, like put up on SoulSeek or something like that. But around the same time that we were making this music, there was a real resurgence of musicians releasing music on cassette because it's cheaper and maybe a more fun, aesthetically pleasing option, to have some merch for local musicians. And while the Blessings Season 1 video doesn't have any of my analog video work or anything really directly related to VHS, so it seems a bit unusual, we were joking a lot in the band early on that it would be interesting to sort of master an album on VHS in terms of just the audio. But then when I was thinking about ways of releasing the album, I was looking at, I wanted something physical, whether that be a postcard or a print with a download or a link to watch the video, or maybe a really short run of lathe cut vinyl. But releasing the album on VHS, I thought it was a nice kind of way to package the audio and visual together, and it creates an object that might live on beyond sort of the web hosting and my digital hard drive failure. I only made 20 because that's how many of the dead stock archival tapes that I could get, and that seemed like a natural number. And I think I sold or gave away all of them, and I have one. I think I have one left or something like that. And so it does seem like an unusual choice, considering in my mind the real video is the digital 16 by 9. But it was really nice process for me to think about designing the VHS graphics, to work with archival tape cases rather than sort of the traditional cardboard layout, to meet people to sort of get the cassettes from, to meet you and to work with the duplication, and even to do the kind of director's cut pan and scan. So to convert to a 4:3, I actually had to sort of choose what sections of the video I wanted for the VHS. So what started out sort of as a joke became something that I think is a really kind of meaningful resolution and the right way to release this project.
Yeah, I think it was really well done, especially the shots that you recomposed for full screen or 4:3. But you were mentioning about cassette tapes. I think in a way, the VHS and the cassette tapes, they kind of go hand in hand, because there was a period where music was available in different media, plus there was also a hunger to have music videos done, and maybe there was a concert video that was done, or maybe the videos themselves were compiled on a tape. The tape maybe was half an hour long, but it sort of part of that process to promote and kind of propagate the music and the art form. But I always like the idea that there's this actual physical representation of one's work. Even though I do like digital, I like having digital backups. But at least you know that with tape, it's VHS in particular, it's pretty resilient. You can destroy the case, but generally the tape is still fine. And I think maybe it's the most resilient of the consumer formats, especially the smaller ones.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. And also, I guess in some sense, if there is any deterioration, that's like a really beautiful part of the medium, right?
There's the damage that can happen from playback if it's, let's say, in a faulty machine or a bad mechanism. I think the only fear to worry about is something called sticky tape syndrome, which also affects audio cassettes and reel-to-reel. But there's a lot of tapes that still hold up fairly well. I mean, even tapes that were done, and this is something even a friend kind of supported, where, we both do transfers, and we've had tapes from the 70s or the early 80s, and they're actually fine. It seems that there was just a period where maybe they were using a specific kind of tape stock, and it just went bad. In university, when we were shooting our film, we recorded all the audio onto reel-to-reel, and it was 1/4-inch 3M stock, and we were using a Nagra. And for the hell of it, I thought I'd pull out one of these tapes just to hear what we recorded then. And it just screeched as it was going through the playback unit. And I realized, okay, I got to bake this thing. And you get maybe a few plays from it, and then eventually just reverts back to its original state. But it's nice to know there are certain decades and certain types of stock that are resilient. But I think in the case of Blessings, I think it's safe because it's on stock that is known to be okay and stable. So people can still enjoy it.
That felt like a blessing to be able to sort of get this really nice tape stock, and also to have it be 1 hour tapes for like a 37-minute video. It seemed like it was really well matched. One of the first people to buy the tape, it was released at Ons Douze, which was a sort of a yearly festival my friends and I put on in Woburn, Quebec, sort of on the border with Maine. My friend Ryan was one of the first people to buy the tape, and it was amazing, sort of the next day after the festival, him sending me a photo of it being played on his CRT with his setup. So there are people, obviously, beyond just you and I, who watch VHS and consume it. And I had a number of people buy it, if not for them, for a friend of theirs that does have a collection. It's not just this archival object. I think some of these tapes hopefully will get some use.
Yeah, and it does look great on a CRT because that particular analog format, just like with Laserdisc, it looks best on a CRT. If you watch it on a widescreen monitor, you have to adjust the framing for it, and then of course you may have to upconvert it, but then if you upconvert it, then it might be softer. But the rich colors that you get from a CRT, that's kind of unique to this analog format, and that's why it looks good.
Thank you for all your work on it.
Like I said, it was a pleasure to do it. It had actually been a while since I've done it, so it was kind of fun to sort of use the remote, have the decks going at the same time, having it playing on the side, making sure everything was okay, double checking everything that it was okay. Something that I used to do quite a while ago when I was doing a lot of tape-to-tape transfers as well. But thank you so much for talking about your video, as well as just the work that you do.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Yeah, like I said, I really enjoyed Blessings. I think it's a fantastic video, and whether it's 4x3 or whether it's widescreen, it looks great, and it was definitely worth the effort that went into it, because the abstract images are really, really beautiful. I think my favorite is I think it's the combination of passing clouds as well as passing trees.
Yeah.
And you get these wonderful they're not quite fractals, but it's just this lovely organic sort of morphing figures that you get, plus the beautiful blue background.
that was one of my first sort of videos that I made, and it was just taking sort of bare trees with a clear sky background and just putting a mirror effect and digitally, and these kind of fractal blobs kind of emerge. And then I figured that track is like 6.5 minutes or something, and it's too long to just have that straight shot. So I ended up compositing other layers of clouds and duplicating that image to sort of make it feel like it's on a lake with reflections, and you sort of go in and out of these different iterations of that sky, lake, tree, fractal universe. Yeah, it's probably one of the most processed parts of the video, but I think it's subtly enough done that it's not so distracting.
Yeah, and it's also very soothing. I just find that these gently moving images, or even the towards the end where it gets a bit more frenetic and a bit harsher with the graphics overlaid, I still find it's very soothing.
Yeah, I think it's, especially this album, can be quite intense at times, and so there are some obviously very calm, beautiful like passages to sort of give the audience a breather. But yeah, you're right. There's something about the sort of consistent kind of perpetual motion of these videos that's calming, and it tempers down the frenetic extreme blast of the music at certain parts. But yeah, it's a very dynamic album, so it was fun to try and pair imagery with it.
Special thanks to Max Farrell for discussing the genesis and production of Blessings Infinity, Season 1. As mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, links to both the short film as well as selections of Farrell's music videos are in the blog and podcast details. To sample tracks and purchase the album, please visit the Blessings Infinity Bandcamp page. And coming shortly to BHA Plus is a blog and featurette tracing the workflow to record the digital file of Farrell's short film to VHS. Small-run digital-to-tape transfers is one of several niche services I provide to filmmakers. Lastly, a quick nod to Hamza Mughal, one of BHA Plus's official sponsors, and a source of both vintage broadcast video gear and select quantities of video stock. Alongside chief founder Barry Silverthorne, Hamza is a fellow co-founder of Canada's Mediatek, the Museum of Broadcast Technology, which welcomes donations of rare broadcast video gear for preservation and archiving legacy media. This podcast was produced for BHA Plus by Big Head Amusements, which also offers unique audio and video services, including podcast post-production and voice work. For inquiries and audio-video samples, please visit bigheadamusements.com. You can also send inquiries and follow us via Facebook and Instagram. This podcast interview is copyrighted 2026 by Mark R. Hassan. Thank you for listening.